Hey there, and welcome to the Visibility for Female Founders podcast. I'm your host, Radhika Lucas, and this podcast is for you. If you're an impact-driven founder, coach, or consultant who wants to find your own voice to speak, present, and amplify your message online, we explore how to get past the visibility roadblocks and grow your capacity to be seen so you can attract and chase your perfect audience while staying connected to the most important things by building a business that works around your life. Welcome back to this episode where I'm talking about TED Talk or TikTok, how to build speaking skills for credibility, impact, and authority online. So the first thing that I wanted to debunk about this is that quite often when I approach people or when people approach me, to find their voice and put themselves out there in terms of gaining visibility, in terms of using the voice that they have and are already creating impact, is that they're often juggling the tightrope between, do I speak on video and how do I speak on video? Because if I can't actually be physically seen so that I can have a presence where people can perceive me, where people can experience me, where people can understand my vibe, that suddenly all doors are shut to me. And this kind of almost becomes like this mountain that people feel like they need to overcome, which is why I felt like today's podcast episode was really on point, because on the very far spectrum of that, I think there is an innate desire that once you are established and you are an authority in your field, or you may already be an authority in your field, you may already be speaking, you may already be presenting to business stages, for example, and you're wanting to go, what's the next way in which I can amplify my authority? And, certainly TED Talk is an option. However, if you are in that space in the middle where you are already creating impact, but your biggest priority isn't necessarily to go on and get that massive big stage like a TED Talk. Perhaps your next biggest stage is actually for your impact to be felt more broadly, and so that you get what I call distribution of your impact to have ultimately financial impact in your business. And so if I think about the credibility that comes with speaking and sharing your perspective and sharing your point of view in settings that help you to slowly expand your speaking voice, then that is exactly what this podcast is going to cover today, where I'm going to be talking about what the false binary might be, what the sweet spot actually is, and essentially how you can gradually step into video and stages using a three-stage or a three-step process. I also want to talk about behavior change when it comes to developing trust in your voice, even though you may already be an impactful leader or you might already be an impactful business owner in your offline business, perhaps, that you may already have. So what are the things or the practical speaking foundations that will help you build that authority through the 5 main things that you can do straight away without needing to reinvent the wheel, and something that you can do even without going online? This is what this podcast is going to cover. And lastly, I'm going to be sharing about what I did and then how you can expand on your story to actually build that trust, authority, and impact that you're really wanting with sharing your own stories and creating that distinctiveness, that nuance that is really what's needed in 2026 and beyond, especially now with the change in AI and the way in which people search for content and what it is that you really need to hone in on, and which is why founder-led content is going to be so important and is where your speaking voice comes in. Without much further ado, let's kick off. Firstly, I just want to debunk something about visibility equating virality. And I feel like this needs to be talked about within the context of people pleasing sometimes, because I feel like visibility and virality can sometimes be accidentally interchanged, where we feel as though sometimes we apportion a huge amount of engagement as a success marker for what might be considered good visibility. So we end up having these rules in our own heads about what's good visibility and what's bad visibility, where, say, if a post does not have a huge amount of engagement, that somehow even subconsciously, we can go, oh, maybe that's not actually as credible. We're actually understanding and having a broader perspective on how algorithms work really help understand how your content gets pushed out, especially if you're leaning on social media. And then the understanding that once you've got that wider context, you know that if you can just pull a few levers, that your content can get seen a bit more, it can go further faster, but not to be relying on that as a be all and end all. Because at the end of the day, when you are wanting to build your speaking skills online, a lot of people get very caught up in the perfectionism and the needing to know absolutely every single last detail, and really go into this kind of almost getting lost in a space of learning and getting down a rabbit hole, which can act as a bit of a crutch to getting started and putting yourself out there in the first place. So that's something that I'm going to flag, is that if you catch yourself in this learning mode where you're finding that you're listening to that and listening to this other course lesson, but they're not actually implementing anything, then you might be caught in an unconscious state of being paralyzed by not putting yourself out there on account of all of those things that I've just mentioned. So that's the first thing that I want to bust, is the visibility virality binary versus the authority equals big stage binary as well, because both actually create pressure and paralysis. But the biggest thing that I've found in growing my speaking skills online is that I didn't start with going viral, and I still haven't gone viral. I've got a very small but impactful audience who actually really love what I talk about. I get some great reviews when people reach out to me, and I've even met some of my podcast listeners in person in some cases. So this is about creating small, repeated speaking moments for yourself through building on using your voice in different contexts. Because here's the thing, that we might all think that we need this one big, huge credibility marker, which is like this one spotlight moment, but actually your voice will mold and adjust. And you will soon find out, the more you do, is that it molds to the various different rooms that you're in. And the more rooms that you're in is where you actually get to learn to trust your voice. And you might find yourself really surprised by how your voice does come up in instances where you least expect it. And so the first thing that I want to then approach is, what is this real sweet spot? What is this middle path to speaking authority that you may not have thought of? And I look at it as a 3-step process. So stage 1 could actually just be conversational speaking. And this can look like either a guest podcast interview, or it could look like a panel interview. So maybe you're getting interviewed as part of a panel, or you're interviewed being a guest on a podcast. You could also then gradually elevate to hosting your own podcast if that's something that you have been considering. But usually a really low pressure way and a way to get your voice out there is by using this conversational speaking technique, which really helps you to firstly build that articulation without the pressure of needing to have everything thought out in advance. It also helps you to compound your messaging clarity. It helps you to think out loud because there's somebody else prompting you, and there's somebody else going, what are the sweet spots in between? What are the things that I'm not understanding? And they get to tease that out so that your thinking about a certain topic can come out a lot clearer. And fourthly, I think it really helps you to build that vocal confidence that you need so that your voice has the inflection to keep people engaged for a while. You're not just flat. You have the ebbs and flows. It's kind of like a conversation, even though you might be speaking to just yourself, like I am right now. And so stage 2, which is the gradual elevation from conversational speaking, could be into a small audience. So these could be smaller networking events. They could be smaller offices. They could be workshops with a smaller audience. They could be community groups where you stand up and there are about 10 or 15 people and you build on your speaking practice. You could join Toastmasters in your area to help you build that speaking to a smaller audience offline first before you bring it online. And so what ends up happening with this, and this is certainly, these are all of the things that I have done, by the way, which is that spotlight helps you build that tolerance that's needed. Your body language and the awareness of your body language, whether your shoulders are creeping in, whether you're pausing, and where your eye contact is, and how you're approaching the audience, and how, if you suddenly have a mind blank, how do you then recover from that on the spot? Your authority begins to be felt and not just spoken. And I think a lot of the times people do put this pressure on themselves to have all the content, when actually sometimes it's not even so much about the content and what you know, but it is about the way in which you deliver it, the way in which you soften into your voice, and you soften into the expertise that you've already developed, so that you can be really heard without needing to feel like you're pushing the agenda. And then stage 3 is that gradual entry into video and stages. What I've found in my experience working with lots of people is that whilst it is good to rip the band-aid off if you are that way inclined, and I'm certainly that way inclined, is that sometimes people are not quite ready for that for whatever reason. And we're not going to delve into that today. But I think for a lot of people, a gradual build-up can feel emotionally safer. It's a little bit like jumping into a cold pool. Some people like to be able to dip their toe in the water first before they're ready to just jump in. And I'm certainly one of those. It also then helps you to build the neurological patterns in your brain that have given you enough safety triggers or safety messages that have said, yes, I've done this. Yes, I have done this. And now I'm doing this. And so there is that slow and gradual identity alignment that actually comes in with the gradual entry into video and stages. So that's certainly something that you can consider for yourself as you are thinking about how you bring your speaking voice online. And just to say that I will certainly reinforce this, is that repetition does wire trust into your nervous system before the world ever sees your confidence. So that's just something for you to bear in mind as you are going in, which kind of segues really well into the point that I want to make next, which is the neuroscience of repetition and voice trust. What I found, and I can certainly reflect back on the very first time that I went and did a Facebook Live, actually, and I can still remember the quiver in my voice. I started sweating. My heart was beating like so fast. I felt like I was going to pass out almost. But I did it. I did it. Did I do it well? No, I think I did it terribly. Did I feel good about having ripped the band-aid off and done it? Yes, I did. Have I gone on to doing a lot more? Yes, I have. But here's another insight for you. As I got more comfortable, I initially first started doing videos that didn't require me to project my voice on video, so face to camera. And what I chose to do instead was because I have a performance background, I used to create comedic reels to begin with, because it just felt safe. But now in hindsight, I know that I was really just hiding behind my fear of having my voice be heard. And it was quite often because I hadn't fully formulated exactly what I wanted to say, which came across a lot easier if I didn't have to find all of the words at all of the time and exactly those 15 or 30 seconds or what have you. And it really didn't lend itself to a whole lot of context. And it focused predominantly on getting my content really sharp, which put a lot of pressure. And it actually just meant that I had additional cognitive load that I simply didn't need. And so that is one way in which I built my own neuroscience of repetition and trust in my own voice slowly. So the other way in which I started was I started with creating little clips of 1 or 2 sentences. So I would write down in my teleprompter. I used a teleprompter, so there's no shame in using a teleprompter. So by all means, go and use a teleprompter if you need to. And what I did was I just typed out the thing that I wanted to say, and then I broke it up into sections. And I literally recorded one sentence at a time. And I'd stitched it together. And these days you've got some great editing tools. You've got edits on Instagram, you've got CapCut, you've got all of these amazing things. So you can certainly use all of those tools to actually get you started. And getting started is the biggest hurdle. Then, well, this podcast is going to be definitely for you, because at the end of the day, you can really only enhance your voice. You can really only take it to the next level once you've got a few reps behind you, once you've actually done some of the work on having the initial, and again, I'm going to bring a swimming analogy here, but holding on to the edge of the swimming pool and practicing your kicks before you can jump in on the deep end. And so this is something that I will highly recommend if you haven't already. It's something that I would do even if you were to say, come and work with me. But rather than doing that, you might as well do this first, so that when you do come and work with me, that you already have had some repetition, that you've already done a few things, so that you can then elevate your voice into communicating your impact rather than just knowing how to speak about what you do online, which is a real big distinction and takes you to that next level. The other thing that I wanted to share from some of the things that I have practiced myself is that I have actually created 6 steps that you can take to really help you prepare for smaller rooms if you're going from maybe say stage 1 into stage 2, where maybe you're part of a panel, maybe you're part of a smaller networking group, maybe you're part of conducting a workshop, is that prepare a tagline introduction or a clear introduction for yourself. It brings you instant clarity, brand recall, and it signals authority. The more you repeat it, the easier it will be for you to remember it, because whilst your one-liner might feel small, over time that will become the sentence that most people will remember you by. And so if you're just getting started, then that may well change, but you've got to allow yourself enough trust in yourself to start off from a place without having to lean on experts to bring all of this together for you. Once you have created a few reps, once you've done a few things, then by all means, get that refinement that you need. Come and work with me and we can work on refining that. But if you're just putting that out to the public for the first time and are just getting started, for example, then you may want to consider using a tool like ChatGPT and coming up with a one-liner that feels more like you. So over time, that sentence does become something that people remember you by. And mine is communicating your impact by finding your true voice. Rolls off the tongue, and I've got different variations of it depending on who I'm speaking to and what context. So that's the first tip. The second tip is I find greeting people personally before you start speaking and before you take the stage, especially in a smaller room. Say, for example, you're hosting a networking event, maybe of 5 to 6 people. And this is something that I have done in the past, right up until April of 2024, was that it helped me to connect with people individually before I was ready to talk about what it is that I do and then lead and facilitate the room. Because let's say if you've already connected, you're then not speaking to strangers, you're actually speaking to people who you've already met. And then that little subtle reframe just really helps you with getting your comfort levels down. The third one that I did was I used to prepare a simple one-pager just for brain freeze moments. Sometimes your environment, there could be something happening, maybe you're on a roll and all of a sudden there's a massive shower, the rain starts and people get distracted. Then, you're like, oh gosh, my moment has gone now. People are talking when I'm supposed to be speaking. And so just that little bit of pattern interrupt can sometimes derail you when you're just starting out. And so for that, having this one pager in big, bold, letters, and I would go so far as to say, create it in a 14-point font so that you can see it really clearly. And then it just helps you to recenter yourself. The fourth thing that I will say is speak with your body rather than just with your voice. The way in which, if you use your arms, like I do, use your arms. All of this advice on keeping your arms to yourself, I just feel like this is outdated advice. We're in 2026. We just need to embrace who we are. If you speak with your hands, speak with your hands. Whatever is going to signal safety in your body is what you need to do first. And the biggest thing that you can do is feel what you're speaking about, feel what it is that you're actually wanting to get across, because the more you feel, the bigger your impact. The more you learn to feel about what you're trying to convey, about what your story is in this, and what story to use and when, is going to help you to shine no matter what the size of your stage. And so that's the fourth tip that I want to leave you with. The fifth one is, sometimes I find that, let's say you are about to host an online workshop with just a handful of people, or maybe it's going to be one of these smaller offices, for instance. Then what I find is that you can just take on a bit of additional jumping arm swings and mouth conditioning, using your mouth, like stretching your mouth, using your tongue, doing all kinds of things with your mouth and then with your body. So like I tend to jump on the spot. I tend to slap my face. Say if I want to have a pattern interrupt and I haven't woken up with a very good mood, that is something that you can do straight away to prime your physiology before you start speaking. And the last one I'm going to say is, probably is the most important point in all of this, is know which story to tell and when. Here's what I'm going to leave you with, is that if you are meeting somebody for the first time, share your origin story, why you do what you do. If you are basically trying to build some intrigue after you've already gotten to know people, share your impact story. So like the story where your most impactful work comes around. If you are wanting to establish some kind of authority after people have gotten to know you and been around your ecosystem for a while, then use your reframe story, which is what you now understand deeply, or what perspective do you want to change. I know that we hear a lot about sharing our stories, but actually sometimes it comes down to knowing what context of the story to use and when, and how much to share of that story and how much not to. And I think there is a real tightrope that can be walked with this, which is why I wanted to bring it back to a resource that I have got, which is how to share your story without oversharing. Seeing as we're on the topic of story, you can simply head to the link that is in the show notes below and get your copy of the How to Share Your Story Without Oversharing guide. So I just wanted to close this off with a reflection that over the last 4 years, I've done a fair bit of showing up and speaking online and speaking in person and taking up stages and doing all kinds of various different types of speaking to put my voice out there. And look, I will say with a degree of certainty that none of it felt fully significant in the time. But when you look at drops that make up the entire ocean, together those moments were actually training my voice to be trusted, not so much by others, but initially for myself, before I was then ready to create that impact. So that is something that I wanted to leave you with, just as you are pondering about your next steps. And if this episode encourages you to take one single small step, even if it is creating those first 6 little tips in preparation for taking up a small room, then send me a note saying what you're going to be doing, which one of those tips you found helpful, because I would love to hear from you. And really just to close it down by saying a reminder that you don't need a viral video, you don't need a TED stage. You basically need repetition, clarity, and the courage to keep speaking in small rooms until your voice feels like home. If you do want to go deeper into choosing and shaping the right stories for credibility, impact, and authority, then you can simply download my guide on how to share your story without oversharing. It'll help you craft the exact stories that prepare you for speaking online and off stage. So with that being said, that's all from me for now, and I'll see you in the next episode. One of the best ways in which I can help keep publishing content, if you're finding it useful, is just to take 2 minutes of your time after the end of each episode to leave a comment or give me a review on what you thought about the episode. Your feedback really helps to bring the podcast episodes to life. Let me know what else you would like to hear about, because Your questions are what is actually going to help bring this podcast to life and make it your own. Have it as a place for you to be able to come back to when you're needing that little bit of inspiration. Now, the way in which you can do that is in the show notes below, which is if you're listening on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify, heading down to within Spotify, you can leave a comment on every single episode, or on Apple Podcasts, you can scroll right to the very bottom of my podcast and it gives you the option to leave a review right at the very end if you scroll all the way down to the end of all the episodes. This is going to help my content being found by more people, but it'll also help me to show up and keep me motivated. So leave me a review and let me know what your thoughts are if you have found this content helpful. Thanks so much.